Hello, I'm Benjamin Williams, and today we're going to be doing another Boson NetSim lab. Today we're in the security section within Boson, and we're going to be doing AAA, so that's Authorization, Authentication, and Accounting Login, Authentication, and Exec Authorization. So our objective for this lab is to configure the router named regional, which is right here, to work with the local database and enable a password inline authentication in order to provide authentication, authorization, and accounting AAA services. And the first task in this lab, you will use AAA to authenticate against the local database for the enabled line and local methods. In the second task, you will configure Exec Authorization against the local user database. And the third task, you will configure the HQ router to authenticate against the Cisco Secure Access Control System, ACS database. So that is right here. So HQ is going to, I guess, send its credentials over to the regional, which is going to authenticate it against the ACS server or TechX server. So this is our topology. We have HQ connected to regional via a serial link. We have the workstation down here that's connected to HQ with a fast Ethernet connection, and then we have our TechX or ACS server connected to the regional, connected up via Ethernet cable as well. So I've read through all of the commands list for this lab and all of the descriptions for those commands. So we're going to be doing our usual. We're going to keep our lab topology up here in the top left. We're going to be doing all of our instructions on the top right. And we're going to be doing our configuration in the CLI down here at the bottom. I always love labbing the security section within Boson because it's very CLI intensive. And every time I do it, I figure that I always learn something new. So I hope to do so in this lab as well. But let's go ahead and get started. So for task 1, it says configure local database authentication by using AAA. Unless otherwise instructed, perform the following tasks on regional. So we want to configure the local database authentication. So it says turn on AAA services. So let's go to regional, enable for privilege exec, conf T for global config, and let's do AAA new dash model. Perfect. Now, the local database, create a username with regional user and a password of regional pass. So let's do username regional user, and password should be regional pass. Perfect. Set the enable password to training. So let's do enable password. Let's type in training. Perfect. Now it says configure login authentication and use the enable password as the default method. So let's do AAA authentication. And we want to do login. And we want it to use the default as the login method. And let's do enable because we want to do the enable password. Perfect. Now it says log out of the router. So let's do exit and exit again. Now we're logged out. Now it's asking me for a password, and we're going to put training in, which is our enable password. And that should take us in. Yep. So that takes us in. And if we do enable to try to get into privilege exec mode, oops, typo, enable, we need to do training again. And we're back into privilege exec mode. So it says access the router through the console port. Which password should you use here and why? So we're going to use the training password because that's our enable password, and we set our login authentication right here in step 4 to use the default method of our enable password. So that's why we have to use training. It says create a login authentication method named local auth and set it to authenticate users against the local database. So let's go back into global config with conf T. Let's do AAA authentication. Let's do context sensitive. We need to do login. We want to name this local underscore authent. And it wants us to authenticate users against the local database. Let's do local, enter. So it says apply local auth to the VTY line. So let's do line VTY 0 through 4. That's what we want. I believe we want to do the first 5 lines. Let me make sure right here it wants me to do the 5 lines instead of all 16 lines. Yep, so it wants me to do the first 4 lines like I thought. All right, Let's do login, authentication, and let's do AAA. Oh, not AAA. It should be local underscore auth. Perfect. Now it says from workstation telnet to regional 10.1.1.2. How did regional authenticate when you use telnet to connect? So let's click on the workstation and let's telnet over to 10.1.1.2. Even though telnet is not secure, we should use secure shell, but looks like we're using telnet for this lab, which is all good. So let's do regional user for our user and regional pass for our pass, and we're in. And let's do training for our enable password, and we're in. So we can do whatever we want to from this workstation on regional because we just telnetted it to the device, and we know all of the credentials. So it says disconnect the telnet session. So let's do that. Let's do an end or exit. Exit, and we're out. Okay, so let's go on to task 2. It says configure AAA exec authorization by using the local user database. So in the local database on regional, create a user with the username regional admin, a password of admin pass, and assign a privilege level 15 to this user. Let's go back over to regional. Let's go exit to get out of the VTY line configuration, and let's go create a user. So username is regional admin. The privilege level is going to be 15, and our password is going to be admin pass. Perfect. All right, now it says telnet from workstation to regional 10.1.1.2 and authenticate as user regional admin. So let's go back over to the workstation. Let's click the up arrow to telnet back into regional. And it wants us to use the regional admin credentials. So regional admin and admin pass. And we're in. And we're going to use training for our enable password, and we're back in. So it said, what privilege level have you been placed at and why? So when I first went in, I was placed at user exec mode. And the reason I think I was placed in user exec mode is that we did create this regional admin and admin pass username on the local device, which is regional, but we never applied the authorization to the actual VTY line. So we're not going to be placed in privilege exec mode automatically because we didn't add the actual authorization to the VTY line. So we have to do that. So it says on regional, create an exec authorization method named local author. Configure authorization to be performed against the local router's database. So if we do that, and then it says step 6 is to apply local auth as an authorization method for the VTY line. So once we do that, we should be placed automatically into privilege exec mode. Let's go back over to regional. Well, first let's exit out of this telnet session. Let's go back over to regional, and let's create the exec authorization method named local auth. So let's do AAA authorization, and we want to do exec, and we want to name it AAA. No, not AAA. We want to name it local underscore author. Spelled that wrong. Author. Spelled it wrong again. Let me slow down. Local underscore author. Perfect. And we want to configure it to be performed against the router's local database. So let's do local. Perfect. Now we need to apply it to the VTY line. So let's do VTY, line VTY 04, enter. And let's do authorization, exec, local underscore author, enter. And now we should telnet, it says telnet from workstation to regional 10.1.1.2 and authenticate as user regional admin. So now we should be placed in privilege exec mode from the start. So let's do regional admin pass. Yep. And as you can see here, we go straight into privilege exec mode, and the reason is because we had that we use the regional admin credentials, and it has a privilege level of 15, which is the highest. So it allows us, and that was applied to the VTY lines. So once we use those credentials, it takes us straight into privilege exec mode, which is what we want. So that answers question 8. It says, which privilege level have you been placed at and why? And we just told you that. So it says disconnect the telnet session. So let's hit an exit here. We're out. So configure the router to authenticate to the ACS database. In this task, you will configure the HQ router to authenticate against the ACS database. ACS server has been pre-configured with the credentials listed in the table below. So we have our TACAX Plus server address, which is 192.168.2.254. Our key, which is Boson, our ACS username Cisco, our ACS user password, and our ACS user specific enable password. So it says, unless otherwise instructed, perform the following steps on HQ. So it says log in to HQ with user HQ admin and password HQ pass. So let's go to HQ. All right, and let's go to HQ admin for our username and HQ pass for our pass. All right, we're in. On HQ, configure ACS server IP address so the router can communicate and authenticate with the server. TACAX Plus communication should be authenticated by using the key Boson and the IP address of 192.168.2.254. So let's go ahead and configure our TACAX configuration so it can talk to our TACAX or ACS server. So let's do enable conf t, and let's do TACAX server of IP address. No, it should be host, I think. Host. Yep, host should be 192.168.2.254. All right, and then let's do TACAX server. Let's do our key of Boson. All right, and it says create a login authentication method named AAA login and configure it to authenticate against ACS server. You should configure the local user database to be the backup authentication method. So let's do AAA authentication. It wants us to do this authentication with the login. It wants us to name it AAA underscore login. It wants us to use the TACAX server first. So let's do group TACAX plus, and let's do local for backup. Enter. All right. It says create an exec authorization method named AAA exec and configure it to authorize exec sessions against ACS server. You should configure the local user database to be the backup authorization method. So let's do a little bit of the same config, but for authorization. So AAA authorization, and it wants us to do the exec, and it wants us to name this AAA underscore exec, and it wants us to first do it against the TACAX server, so group TACAX, and then the local as backup. Perfect. Apply AAA login and AAA exec methods to the BTY line. So let's do that now. Let's do line BTY 0 through 4. Perfect. And let's do a login authentication AAA underscore login. And let's do a authorization of exec. And let's do AAA underscore exec. Perfect. Now, configure enable authentication to use ACS server for primary authentication and use the local enable password as backup. So let's do AAA authentication. Okay, no, I need to get out of VTY line configuration mode. So let's exit and let's do AAA authentication. Authentication, and we want to do, okay, it says configure enable authentication to use the ACS server as the primary authentication. So let's do login, and we want to I think I need to do default and enable. I don't think that is right. Let me read this one more time. It says configure enable authentication to use the ACS server for primary authentication and use the local enable password as backup. So authentication, let's do enable, default, and let's do enable. I don't know if that's correct. Let me get some help on this because I don't want to get it wrong. Want to make sure I'm doing it right. So I did enable, I did AAA authentication enable default, but we want to do the group first. Okay. Yeah, because we want to do the TechAct server first. Okay. Yeah, so that's my fault. Okay, so enable default, but we want to do the group first and then TechAct plus, and then we want to do enable. Got it. Okay. You did a little bit of assistance on that. Like I said, I always learn something new. So that is good to know. Configure enable authentication to use the ACS server for primary authentication and use the local enable password as the backup. So that's good. I know how to do that now. So it says from workstation telnet to HQ 192.168.1.1. Log in by using the credentials listed in the table at the beginning of the task. So now we're going to log into HQ from the workstation. So that's straight up right here. So let's go over to our workstation and let's telnet to 192.168.1.1. And let's look at the credentials it wants me to use. It wants me to use the username of Cisco and the user password of Cisco Pass. So Cisco Pass. And we'll play straight into privilege exec mode, which means that this username was configured, this username and password combo was configured with a privilege level of 15 on HQ. So we know that. It says, what credentials did you use? I used the ones that it told me to use in the top of the task. What credentials would you use if the ACS server failed? Well, if the ACS server failed, then I'm going to use the backup, which would be either the local backup or the enable password to be able to log on to HQ. It says from workstation, enter privilege exec mode on HQ. Which password did you enter to enter privilege exec mode and why? Well, I'm already placed in privilege exec mode, so let's try to do exit, see what happens. Okay, so it disconnects me from the session when I did that. So let's do a Cisco Pass. Yeah, so it puts me right into privilege exec mode. So I'm not, for this question right here, I don't have to enter a password. I'm already in privilege exec mode. Okay, it says disconnect the telnet session. Can multiple enable passwords exist on the router? I would say yes, but I'm not sure if that's correct, and I'm not sure why it is correct. But initially, I would say yes, you can have multiple enable passwords. Let's go down and see what it says for number 10 and also number 12. The explanations that it says. So for number 10, it says from the telnet session from workstation to HQ, issue the enable command and then enter Cisco enable to enter privilege exec mode on HQ. Okay, so I see what happens. It wanted me to use HQ admin and HQ pass first. So let's do that. Let's go back up. Telnet. Let's do HQ admin, HQ pass. And it still places me right into privilege exec mode. So I'm not sure. I think this is an error in Boson or either error on my end. We'll see once we grade. It says, let's go back down. It says, yes, multiple enabled passwords can exist on the router. So that's good. We got that correct. It doesn't really give us an explanation though, but that's just good information to know. So I think that is the end of this lab. I mean, it just told me to log back into HQ. So I'm already logged in. So I think we're good. Let's grade and see how we did. So we got everything correct on this lab right here. I always like to do the security section within Boson, especially the authentication, authorization, and accounting stuff with the TACACS plus server, because it's just a lot of config. You get your hands really dirty, and I always seem to learn something new. So thank you guys for watching this one. I'll see you in the next one.